What's up, you radical human? Welcome back. Today, we are back in the saddle with the one, the only Dr. Paul Saladino. And given that we're halfway through January, we get his take on his previous year. He was a busy boy. I asked him when we're going to finally be able to do pull-ups in the airport. We got some of his ins and outs, some of the trends that he's seeing evolving, some of the concerns with things like people very quickly jumping on peptides. But we really take a deep dive into the OG peptide, colostrum. What is colostrum? Well, you might know that it's the first milk from a cow, bovine. But when we eat it, we can experience remarkable health benefits. Everything from immune modulation to better recovery, better brain health. It's fantastic. And as you know, nobody breaks it down quite like Paul does. So let's dive into the magic of colostrum and why all of the other colostrum on the market is bunk. But we've got something in store for you. Tune in and find out. Let's go.
Paul, welcome back, my friend, and a happy new year. By the time this one goes live, we're right in the middle of January. So I'm curious, you've been a busy boy recently. You're all over the place. My first question is, do you have any insider information on when I'm going to be able to do pull-ups in the airport? And my second question is, what are you bringing into 2026 and what are you psyched about?
Yeah, I don't know. I was actually just texting Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy the other day. It's definitely happening in 2026. We'll probably see it at DC airports first. The federal government owns Reagan and Dulles, so those are easier. But I need to check in with him. I mean, we're just in January now after the holidays. And so we'll see which airports. I fly through Miami a lot, so I'm hoping to help liaise an airport gym in Miami, a mini gym. I think it's going to happen this year. It might be a few months because I think there's going to be some wrangling that's going to happen, but I'm excited to do it. And then I'm just excited to see what kind of community it creates in an airport because I think once you, Steve, are doing pull-ups and I'm doing pull-ups and other people are doing assisted pull-ups or dips or just stretching in these environments, other people are going to see them and think like, what are those people doing? And then once it's okay, once it's cool to move in an airport, it's going to bring together some interesting people. And I think it's going to be a very healthy environment and community, which could be really fun. So super stoked about that project. It's really, really cool to be a part of it. I've got a lot of things going on this year in 2026. It's going to be a big year, man. I am just finishing writing a book. So probably the book will be out later this year. And then still working on this documentary. And they're both sort of around the same theme, which is just how humans can eat and live to be optimally healthy. And it's fascinating to me how simple it is, but how badly we often get it wrong in mainstream society and how confusing it is for us. Sometimes intentionally, probably obfuscated by industry interests, and sometimes unintentionally, the waters get muddied. But I think that the overarching theme of both the documentary that I'm working on and the book is just the fact that for so many people who struggle with chronic illness, whether it's autoimmune conditions, inflammatory diseases, so many conditions that plague us, diabetes, obesity, insomnia, depression, anxiety. These are, for the most part, the majority of people can fix these things, can reverse them simply by improving the way they eat and how they live. And that's just not the mainstream messaging from physicians in Western medicine. I am one, right? I went to medical school. I've been through it. And unless it's changed a lot since I went to medical school, which I know it hasn't, the mainstream medical ethos, the paradigm is not really centered upon telling people, hey, your disease is fixable.
Right.
And this is such a cool thing that I want to empower people to understand that whatever they're suffering from, eczema like me, psoriasis, like I said, obesity, insomnia, infertility, low libido, low testosterone, PCOS in women, endometriosis, inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. Man, I've seen everything under the sun improve. Some of it with carnivore, a lot of it with animal-based, and some of it with variations of animal-based, which are just sort of broad perspectives around what is food for humans. And so it doesn't have to be so limited, but the ethos, sort of the angle of all of it is the same. What are the simplest foods that humans can eat? And once you start messing with those, everything goes off the tracks. We'll talk about it today a little more when we get into the gut stuff with colostrum.
Yeah. Well, you said the key word there. I think it is actually, the solution is simple. And it's that classic simple, not always easy. And I think you're right. We've obfuscated it to the point where it feels complex now. And there's a lot of noise. And I think that's one of the problems, probably getting back to living more like a human, is actually reducing the noise and simplifying, because we've become a species with amnesia. Like, we don't know what food is. And some people don't know what that term "just eat real foods" is, because of the sheer amount of noise and the sheer amount of misinformation. So this message is hopeful in the sense that it is simple. I know it's not always easy, because we've got some, kind of giants that we're fighting, but the solutions are pretty good. They're pretty, they're baked into the cake of who we are. We've just forgotten them. So we don't need to learn anything new. We've got to remember what we've forgotten. And I think that's what's really approachable about your message, and hopefully the broader message that is the good side of the coin of mass amounts of information in social media, is these voices and these conversations are getting amplified now, which is really hopeful.
Real food is super simple. I'll define it. It's single ingredient foods. So meat, chicken, fish, beef, pork, bison, whatever, deer, elk you hunted, eggs, dairy, milk, cheese, plant foods, fruits, oranges, apples, bananas, squash.
Yeah.
You want to eat sweet potato or white potato, if those things work for you, great. Single ingredient foods, they don't have a label. And then anything with a label has to pass the great grandmother test, which is, would your great grandmother recognize everything on that label? That's food for humans. And once you start messing with that, once we start stripping out the signals, there's just incredible complexity and information in real, simple food, in single ingredient foods. And once we start stripping that out, our bodies don't respond well to it. It's fascinating. I'm finishing this chapter of my book right now. There's 2 parallel chapters on what causes metabolic dysfunction. And one of them is about refined sugars and starches. And it's just fascinating to me. We've talked about this on previous podcasts, that you can eat an orange, an apple. You can drink apple juice, freshly made apple juice. You can drink orange juice. You can eat honey. These are foods that contain sugar, and your gut is fine. You do not get negative consequences. But if you consume refined sugars, table sugar or high fructose corn syrup, or refined starches, which I think people don't always realize, white bread, pasta, cakes, cookies, candies, white flour, even white rice could really be considered a refined starch. You are clearly triggering an increased production of lipopolysaccharide, also known as endotoxin, in your gut. And that creates leaky gut. It just triggers all of these huge inflammatory signals in the gut, the release of zonulin, the sort of fenestrations between the cells of your gut epithelium, so that your gut becomes more like Swiss cheese. And that's what leaky gut is. And then this lipopolysaccharide, this gram-negative cell wall component, leaks into the human body, into the blood. You get a condition called endotoxemia, and everything falls apart. The wheels literally come off in your body when you have increased levels of endotoxin. It's so clear. You can look at people with type 2 diabetes. They have increased levels of LPS, endotoxin. You can look at people with healthy dietary patterns, like we're describing. They have lower levels of endotoxin. I wish there were a more widely available test for endotoxin, for lipopolysaccharide. There just isn't. There are LPS antibodies in the blood, but you have to do all of this research in a lab. Most of us can just look at ourselves in the mirror and know if we're metabolically healthy. If you want to check your blood work, you can check fasting insulin. It should be less than 5, ideally less than 3 micro-IU per ml. Fasting glucose, less than 80. Hemoglobin A1C, less than 5.2 or 5.3, 5.4 is ideal. So that's how you know if you're metabolically healthy. And I can almost guarantee you that if you're not metabolically healthy, your blood has a lot of endotoxin in it. And a lot of that could be driven in your gut. I also happen to think it's driven by excess accumulation of linoleic acid, which gets kind of stuffed into all of our cell membranes and mitochondrial membranes, and everything goes awry there. But from a gut perspective, these refined carbohydrates, the refined sugars and starches, are just one of the things that are basically causing us to always have leaky gut. And I'll just say this one thing and then I'll pause. This is a feature. It's not a bug. So if you historically had endotoxin in your blood, had endotoxemia, your body is getting invaded by bacteria or a pathogen. And so your body shuts everything down. You shut down oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria, and you shift over to anaerobic glycolysis. This is an emergency danger program in the human body. The problem is that we are inappropriately signaling our body that we're always under attack by pathogens when we eat junk food. So really what we're doing, it's like you think of it, and this is where I think things are perhaps nefarious, but certainly misleading the majority of the time. the amount of calories in a Twinkie and the amount of calories in a small piece of steak might be the same, or an apple and a cookie might be the same, but these are not the same food in the way that your body perceives them when you ingest them. One of them is perceived as an evolutionarily recognizable food. That is food for humans. One of them is an absolute sort of mirror of an infection. You're telling your body when you eat a cookie, this may sound hyperbolic, but it's just not. When you eat a cookie, when you eat cakes, when you eat pasta, refined starches or sugars, you are literally giving your body the signal that you have an infection. And so your body goes, whoa, there's endotoxin in the blood. I have to shut everything down, and you become insulin resistant. So the solution is quite simple, but it all kind of starts with how we're damaging our gut. So it's really interesting. Most people think that sugar is bad for you because it raises your blood sugar. I argue sugar and refined starches are bad for you because of how they destroy your gut.
Mm-hmm. Because of the meddling, right? It's funny that nature is so intelligent that it put the medicine in the food, in its whole food form.
Yes.
And man is so foolish that we meddled with it, decoupled the entourage effect, started messing with things, and then are surprised when we have these unintended consequences. So yeah, this idea, I know people poo-poo it sometimes, this idea of just eat real food, but that's where the medicine is. And like you said, there's a very different signal in your body when you eat real food versus when you eat ultra processed versions of it. And it's just wild to me that it's sometimes a contested topic, that's obviously the case. And I know you're, very dialed in on your diet, and we've talked about this paradigm before of just viewing things through the lens of food and not food. And it's much easier in that sense. If you value your health, it's one of your key priorities, then you don't eat the not food. But just over the holidays, my mom sent me, God love her, she sent me a box of English chocolates, and it was very nostalgic for me. And I was like, I'll have a couple of these. But I could feel that response that you were talking about after a couple of these cheap, crappy quality chocolates. There was a little reaction from my body. And the day after I woke up, just like a baseline level of congestion that isn't really there, a little like not so smooth in the cogs of, just because that's what my body was doing. It shifted into that other mode where it was like, put out the fires. And that was just like a few handfuls of chocolate. So it's crazy when you think about people that don't pay attention to this stuff. They're eating ultra processed food 365 days a year, turned into a decade, turned into 2 decades. And then it manifests as all kinds of these modern problems that are exploding. It's really sad.
It's really fascinating, and it's super sad. Yeah. In unprocessed food, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of phytochemicals. What we're talking about here is things like white potatoes versus potato flour, or whole wheat versus white wheat flour, or like white flour, or refined sugar versus apples. The whole foods have hundreds or thousands of chemicals, phytochemicals, that mitigate overgrowth of the wrong type of bacteria in our gut. And without those compounds, they go out of control. We get dysbiosis predominantly in the small intestine. So sugar is not bad for you when it is coupled with the signals that your body has always encountered for hundreds of thousands of years. It's only bad for you when you strip away those signals and the unimpeded overgrowth of bacteria ensues. And that can happen with both sugars and starches, because beyond your stomach, whether this is amylose, amylopectin, which are long polysaccharide chains of glucose, or this is sucrose, which is a disaccharide of glucose and fructose, it all looks the same to your small intestine because it all gets broken down into monosaccharides and small molecules. And so it doesn't matter. So it's interesting to me because, there are a lot of people, the bodybuilding community, for instance, looks at white rice and goes, this is fine. This is great for me. It's easy to digest. And I'm thinking, the more I dig into this, I think you're causing dysbiosis. I think you're just absolutely bombing the small intestine with no signals that are going to mitigate the overgrowth of bacteria in your gut, and you're just causing endotoxemia. And so I don't think that white rice is a benign food at all. It's crazy though, because it starts to kind of get into a little bit of a complex framework. You think, okay, well, should we be eating brown rice? But brown rice is probably harder to digest because all these grains, all these plant seeds have defense chemicals. And we know that brown rice is much higher in heavy metals. So we just kind of have to, again, you kind of fall down the rabbit hole. We're not going to go down that one today. But I think if you had to compare whole wheat with processed white flour, obviously whole wheat is better. Whole wheat is going to have lots of things that are going to make it hard for digest for humans. Humans have, I think, refined these things to get rid of some of those things that make these whole grains harder to digest. But then again, we have also then triggered probably these gut issues and this endotoxemia in ourselves. Broadly speaking, it will come as no surprise to most people listening to this podcast that then I would say probably just avoid those things in general. Grains, I think, are pretty hard for humans in general. This is sort of the foundation of the animal-based diet. I think humans have eaten meat, we've eaten organs, we've eaten animal foods. We tend to prefer fruits and honey when we can get them. And then there isn't a precedent for eating some roots that are well cooked in these tribal cultures. But beyond that, you don't see a lot of grain consumption in these cultures unless they're really starving and they can't avoid it. So, and there's certainly, I don't think there are many cultures I'm not aware of any indigenous cultures that are eating white rice and having good health because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a lot of this story really centers around gut health. And obviously you've got the very old quote that all disease begins in the gut. And one of the foods that seems to be particularly almost medicinal and miraculous in its effects that it can have on the gut is colostrum, which is first milk. And that's kind of what I wanted to pick your brain on today, because when we start to try and source a truly real colostrum and you start to peek under the hood of the colostrum industry, it's a house of cards. It's very pretty and it's presented as this superfood, and it can be if it's real, but there's a lot of issues too. So what have you learned about diving into the colostrum research and its effects on health?
Well, it's fascinating stuff. I think we back up one step and we sort of foreshadowed this. You think about, I think the main reason that humans take colostrum is for gut benefits, right? We talked about leaky gut some, and we talked about these refined sugars and starches causing leaky gut. But if you really look at it, there are so many things in our food supply that can cause damage to our gut. So refined sugars and starches, so you've got sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, you've got white flour, any of the refined things. But then you've got all of these emulsifiers and sort of stabilizers in food. So you've got things like cellulose gums, carboxymethylcellulose, you've got carrageenan. And then you just go down and down and down the rabbit hole. You have alcohol, you have all of these drugs we take like ibuprofen and NSAIDs, even aspirin can cause issues in the gut. And so you're thinking like, wow, most of us do one of these things on a daily basis. Most of us eat some sugar, eat some high fructose corn syrup, eat some refined starches, take an aspirin, take an ibuprofen. We drink some alcohol. We are exposing ourselves to some food that has carrageenan. Again, my great-grandmother doesn't know what carboxymethylcellulose, which is sometimes labeled as cellulose gum on labels, or carrageenan are, but they look to be very damaging for the human gut. This fails the great-grandmother test, but a lot of us are eating these things. Our guts are literally under siege today. This is where colostrum enters the picture. What an incredibly powerful food to repair our guts. And when you start looking into the mechanisms here, it's insane. I mean, the benefits of colostrum are crazy. Most of us hopefully had colostrum when we were first born. In humans, breast milk is colostrum for the first 24 hours or so. And the same thing happens in cows and other mammals. What's interesting to state up front is that cross-species mammalian sort of synergy or mammalian similarities suggest that, the colostrum even from a cow can be beneficial for a human. I mean, we see this with raw milk too. Again, raw milk is a hotly contested topic. But when I've looked at the research, it's pretty incredible the benefits that mammalian raw milk can have in Homo sapiens. So non-Homo sapiens milk. I mean, obviously, it would be interesting. I don't think anyone will ever do this research. If you could get a human colostrum and feed it to someone with gut issues, that would probably be very helpful. But we have a bigger supply of bovine colostrum. When the colostrum is harvested, you want to make sure that the baby cows have enough to support their growth so we can have healthy, sort of cows. But there's a lot of extra that's produced, and there is an industry that's sprung up where that colostrum can be powdered, freeze-dried and powdered and given to humans. What a cool concept in theory. And then if you look at the research, you say, actually, giving humans colostrum can improve gut permeability. There are multiple components of colostrum that we can talk about, whether it's sort of signaling molecules, cytokines, growth factors, IGF-1, TGF-alpha and beta, or proline-rich peptides, which can modulate the immune response in the gut. There are immunoglobulins, which are big sort of proteinaceous immune molecules that can also bind to harmful things in the gut. And the sort of the synergy of all these compounds, which are much higher in colostrum than they are in milk, The colostrum is like very concentrated medicinal milk. It's so good for our gut. So colostrum is a great thing. It's an amazing thing, kind of akin to organs. And this is why we do what we do at Heart and Soil, right? A lot of us can't get fresh testicles. A lot of us can't get fresh colostrum. I mean, whenever I go to California, I'm always trying to get it, or even in Miami, but colostrum is very strictly regulated. It's very hard to get fresh, raw colostrum from a farm. In some places, when I was in California, they told me that if they gave me colostrum, they would literally go to jail. Like
Wow.
The federal agents will show up to their house with assault rifles if they give people colostrum. And this is a place where raw milk is legal, but you cannot get raw colostrum. So it's a very valuable thing for humans to be able to assess or to access a powdered colostrum. But then, yeah, as you know, enter the problems, right? So when we're making organs, like the desiccated organs you guys make at Heart and Soil, we're looking for grass-fed, regeneratively raised cows. We want to test them for heavy metals and pesticides and contaminants. The same is true of colostrum, but colostrum is a little bit more fragile because it's more fat and it has to be sort of taken in the beginning part, right? So there's all these ways that colostrum has to be carefully harvested or collected and then processed to get the most bioactive product into a human mouth. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because like you said, when we started looking into this, you can see that this is really a house of cards, that very few companies out there do it right from the beginning to the end. So very few companies are doing it right from the udder to actually a human ingesting it. And there's all these things where it can go wrong. You could get colostrum from cows that are not healthy. The cows maybe aren't grass-fed. They're not regeneratively raised. Yep. Is the colostrum actually from the first 24 hours? Is it really a first day milking colostrum? Once you collect the colostrum, how are you freeze drying it? Are you freeze drying it properly? Are you handling it too roughly? Are you handling it in a way that's going to damage it? Are you using too many heat cycles to dry it? And then are you stripping components of the colostrum away? Because colostrum, like milk, is a complex food. Do you remember growing up, did your parents give you skim milk? Because that was all we drank when I was a kid.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the same thing is sort of happening to a lot of colostrums now. They're being de-fatted. So I hope that most people listening to this have had the unique pleasure of drinking a whole raw milk. It's divine. It's luscious. It's appropriately fatty. And from the fat of milk comes butter and many other foods, which contain lots of immunologically active compounds. In the fat of milk and in the fat of colostrum is something called the milk fat globule membrane. And this is a layer of lipids that protects all the bioactive components of colostrum. So a lot of colostrums are getting de-fatted, which strips away the milk fat globule membrane. Then you end up with components that are stripped away out of the colostrum, and then the components that remain, like the immunoglobulins or bioactive peptides or other molecules like IGF-1 or TGF alpha and beta, are more susceptible to damage in your stomach. And so it's like, wait, why would you want to drink skim milk? Why would you want to drink why would you want to take an incomplete powdered colostrum when you should just be getting whole milk? You should be getting the whole complete colostrum. So this has been a really cool journey, I think, is understanding, like you said, how number one, how beneficial colostrum is, and number two, how badly it's mostly made in the industry because it's become such a thing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of chicanery in particular with the IgG number, right? Because companies will de-fat and then artificially inflate the IgG because it looks really good from a marketing perspective. So they can say 40% IgGs, but if you look at the whole food matrix colostrum, it's lower than that. And somebody that doesn't have this underpinning of what we're actually talking about here is going to look at that. It's a clever marketing play. They're going to say, well, I'll choose the one with the higher levels of IgGs, not realizing that that's because of some little back-end chicanery that's going on to artificially inflate that number. And now it's not the real thing anymore. It's to start with where we came from, the point around real food and the entourage effect. Like, you want it in as real form as possible. And if you're defatting it and artificially inflating IgGs, it sure might look impressive, but it doesn't tell the whole story.
It's a completely different thing, right? And then, like we said, if you pull out that milk fat globule membrane, if you defat the colostrum, those immunoglobulins are more likely to get degraded in the stomach. And they're not actually going to be biologically active by the time they get to your small intestine, which is what you want. One of the things that's interesting, like you said, is that colostrum from a cow is only 20% IgG. So any company, like the number one company selling, colostrum in the US, Armra, it's like they're claiming this inflated IgG number that is based on the fact that they're making their colostrum incomplete. They've stripped things away from their colostrum. They've defatted it, and they've taken out the casein. And so that if you take away the fat components, you're kind of concentrating it, but you're losing a lot of the bioactive components, and you're stripping away the protective mechanisms that allow the bioactive components in the colostrum to actually do good in your human body. If we're talking about the immunoglobulins, the other side of the IgG number is just the IgG activity. So is this immunoglobulin, which is a large complex protein, actually going to be able to bind things in the human gut? That's what it's there for. So there's multiple types of immunoglobulins in the human body. You have IgA, IgG, IgM, IgE. In colostrum, we're basically talking about IgA and IgG, maybe a little IgM. But are these immunoglobulins actually going to be able to bind things, or is it just a fragment of the immunoglobulin that they're saying is an immunoglobulin particle? This gets a little technical, but there are two ways to assay immunoglobulins. You can use HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography, and then you can use ELISA, which is enzyme linked immunofluorescent analysis. So in HPLC, you can get an absolute number for the IgGs. You could say, it's 40% IgGs or 60 or 50. Oh, great, there's a lot of immunoglobulins. Well, number one, the way they got there is by stripping away other bioactive components. Number two, when you take those incomplete colostrum IgGs and you put them in an ELISA, do they actually bind? A lot of times they don't have any biological activity. So what you're essentially paying for with a lot of the colostrum on the market today is very expensive powdered milk.
Yeah.
Now, powdered milk is great. You shouldn't pay $100 for,
No.
You shouldn't pay $100. You shouldn't pay $100 for 100 grams of powdered milk. That's crazy. Powdered milk is much cheaper than $1 a gram, but that's essentially what a lot of these companies that are defatting and sort of stripping away these components of their colostrum, making it an incomplete colostrum, are doing, is they're making this inflated IgG claim without actual numbers to back up that it's active.
Yeah, and then it just, like you said, it's not very user informed that I'm going to get the benefits that I think I'm buying into, because we do hear miraculous things. One of the things I was super surprised by is that it's a tested and banned substance in some sports, right? I think the NCAA, I've got some CrossFit friends that want to take colostrum, but it's on their ban list because that's potentially to do with like the IGF and being insulin like growth factor, right? Potentially helping with recovery and repair. That was really surprising to me because it feels like you'd have to take a lot of colostrum to pop for a drug, but it speaks to its potency, right? What is going on there, and how might that impact not just the immunoglobulins and the immune effects that we're talking about, but things like recovery, performance, and muscle growth, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting. Peptides are interesting. Peptides are sort of small protein fragments. I think the technical definition is less than 50 amino acids. After 50 amino acids, it gets to be a polypeptide, like the proline-rich polypeptides we can talk about later in the podcast. But smaller peptides, they do seem to have activity in the human body. IGF-1 is probably a polypeptide, but it's a pretty significant peptide. It's a growth factor for sure. And it definitely triggers the release of things like growth hormone and, valuable things in the human body. And you can imagine that as a baby calf or a baby human is born, you want the signal from the milk to be grow. And for a lot of us in 2026, we still want the signal to be grow and repair. Obviously, you can get too much of that. If you abuse growth hormone, it's not good for humans. But what you're getting in the colostrum is probably a gentle signal for that. It's unclear how much of the IGF-1 in any colostrum survives digestion, but certainly you have a better chance of getting a signal, an actually biologically active signal for regrowth, repair, or I would say enhanced performance from an IGF-1 in a complete colostrum, right? Rather than a defatted, incomplete colostrum, skim milk, whole milk. And so, yeah, IGF-1 is the reason that colostrum in general is on the NCAA banned list. I don't know that anyone's ever had a positive drug test for growth hormone or IGF-1 supplementation from taking colostrum, but it's there. So it's just one of the reasons that people could benefit from colostrum. And again, this milk fat globule membrane is part of the thing that protects these things. And that's a biological design. Between your mouth and your intestines lies your stomach. And the stomach is very acidic. And so here is this natural design, this beautiful natural design. When a cow or a human or any mammal makes colostrum, they are packaging it as a whole food, a complete colostrum. I think somewhere this biological intelligence knows there are things like IGF-1 or other growth factors or signaling molecules like TGF alpha and beta, which can mitigate inflammatory issues in the gut, that have to get through the gauntlet of the stomach, right? PRPs do the same thing. So proline-rich polypeptides are very similar. They have to get through the gauntlet of the stomach, and they're much more likely to get degraded if that milk fat globule membrane has been stripped away. And you have the problem that a lot of these companies that are defatting, again, I'm not going to name any names, but the most common colostrum people think about is defatting, and they're stripping out casein with that. Casein is one of the milk proteins. And a lot of the PRPs, a lot of the proline-rich peptides are in that casein fraction of the colostrum. So you're losing a lot of the PRPs. Now, proline-rich peptides or polypeptides are fascinating because they have this sort of ability to bidirectionally modulate the immune response. If there's too much immune response, they can sort of tamp it down. If there's not enough immune response, they can give the immune system a little get up and go, a little kick in the butt to get going. And so they're very interesting, and they kind of mirror the sort of effects that we have with organs. And this is why I think we're so excited about organs, either fresh or the desiccated organs that Heart and Soil makes, is that these peptides and microRNAs, which are signaling molecules that accompany them, seem to be able to survive digestion in the stomach, provided they're in a whole food form, and then affect human body in positive ways, usually bidirectionally. So if you look at whole package, for instance, the supplement that Heart and Soil makes with the testicle in it, the reviews kind of speak for themselves, but the amount of testosterone in the whole package is probably not what's causing men to feel like their libido is improved or their gym performance is better. It probably has to do with peptides or microRNAs, which pass through digestion and sort of bidirectionally help our body attenuate or adjust signaling. That's where things get really interesting. Now, a lot of these microRNAs are carried in exosomes, and exosomes are preserved in raw milk. So this is another reason that raw milk is probably better than pasteurized milk. So if you want to get these signaling molecules in milk, it's going to go in an exosome. And the exosomes are also going to be in colostrum. Well, exosomes are lipid-bound molecules. They're lipid-bound particles. You're going to remove any exosomal information coming into your body when you have a defatted colostrum. So you're stripping away the milk fat globule membrane. That's going to strip away exosomes. So microRNAs, again, it's skim milk, whole milk. You're really making an incomplete colostrum when you defat it. Why do companies do it? They do it to inflate the IgG number, and they do it to make it water soluble. They think, it's going to be easier to mix in water. They understand that consumers want something convenient. The trick is that when you have a complete colostrum, like what we were able to finally source at Heart and Soil after looking high and low, and I know the team there looked really hard for what we've got and are really proud of it, it doesn't mix as well in water. You need a frother because it's going to clump, because it actually has all of the components that are in there. It has fat, which is not always miscible in a water solution. So fat and water don't always mix. You can use a frother or a blender. It'll mix it just fine, but you have to work a little harder. Companies are kind of smart. Maybe they think like, people want to mix it in water. We want it to be soluble. If they want to put it in apple juice, let's give them a product that has is easy to use as a consumer without really considering the fact or ignoring the fact, incorrectly marketing the fact that it's going to be less biologically active when you strip the things away. So yeah, colostrum, super powerful, but also so frequently badly done in the industry.
That point about defatting it to increase solubility is really interesting, because that's what surprised me the most when I got the colostrum and I opened it. My first instinct is to smell it, to taste it. And firstly, it smells alive. And I can be clever here because I don't need to name names, but I can say that certain people in the colostrum industry act like cowboys, if you understand what I'm saying. And their colostrum didn't smell or taste really like anything. Ours almost has like this nutty Parmesan cheese kind of flavor texture. I threw it down the mouth, rinsed it with some water. It was sticky. You could just tell immediately, like, oh, this is the real deal. And it's, is it maybe slightly less inconvenient for people because they want to put it in apple juice? Sure, but then you're getting a significantly more nutrient dense food. So which one do you want to optimize for?
Obviously, you want the thing that's better. Yeah, I just dry scoop it. I mean, I've been dry scooping it. I mean, you can see it. It's amazing. Like, we've got it in the glass jar too, but I've been dry scooping it every day. And it's pretty interesting because you look at the dosing as well of colostrum, and there's benefits to colostrum in terms of mitigating leaky gut at even 500 milligrams of extract, which is probably equivalent to like 1 or 1.5 grams. The common brand of colostrum people think of is only marketing you 1 gram of colostrum. That's the serving size. And theirs is much more expensive than what we were able to make. So, but I think that the actual dose that you want is at least 3 grams of colostrum, which is how big the scooper we made is. And the scooper is also paper, by the way. We can talk about that with microplastics. But what's cool is if you dry scoop it, it tastes really good. Like, I really like the taste of it, and I'll just chew it in my mouth. And there are studies showing that even 10 or 20 grams of colostrum a day can have significant benefits in humans. And so I was like, well, let me just do some experiments. And I really have been loving it. Obviously, I'm going through the colostrum really fast when I'm doing 20 grams a day. I'm doing 6x the normal dosing. It doesn't last as long. But, if people have acute gut issues, bigger doses, 10 or 20 grams, have been studied in humans and found to be pretty darn effective. So, and I just dry scoop it. So the taste factor, the quality of the taste is something I notice right away. I've dry scooped other brands and it doesn't taste anywhere near as good. The mouthfeel isn't as good as what we've got. And again, like, it's not just to say like, oh, ours is the best. No, like, the team there looked so hard for this colostrum. I want people to understand this. And again, I think it's fine to talk about it because we're proud of it and we make things that are really good. And so I want people to know about it. This isn't a commercial. It's just, hey, I mean, we've been trying to make this freeform colostrum for like 18 months, for a year and a half, Steve. I know you know this. Like, this is almost a 2-year project. Yep. And the number of colostrum manufacturers that the team has gone through, that the team has said, like, Heart and Soil spent thousands of dollars testing colostrums for contaminants, for IgG levels, for IgG activity. And what we consistently found was that most, like we said in the beginning, it's a house of cards. Most of what's on the market is garbage. We didn't want to make a product that wasn't going to hold up to scrutiny. I mean, I wouldn't let that happen, right? And I know that the team wouldn't let that happen either. So I mean, who knows how many things the team tried? Probably 10 to 20 different manufacturers were tested. And these are manufacturers that are in the market. This is how we know it's a house of cards. These are manufacturers that you are seeing other companies use that we said, no, that's not good enough. It's defatted. The IgG is not effective in an ELISA test. It has contaminants. It's not a high enough quality colostrum for us to use. It was so hard to find this. And I mean, that's kind of the way it's gone, like that's how good products get made across all the companies that I see. Like, it was the same way with our whey protein at Heart and Soil. It was like, how do we find a grass-fed whey protein that has the lowest heavy metals, but it actually has the highest number of biologically active immunoglobulins? And if you look at the whey protein container, which is also all paper and no plastic, it's listed on there, the IgA, the lactoferrin, all of these biologically active components in whey protein that we had to look high and low to find the best whey protein. So there's just, whey proteins are a good example. There's a million of them. There's a million colostrums right now, but it is not the same. These are not the same. And I think I would encourage people to try the colostrum from Heart and Soil and to dry scoop it, and then to dry scoop other colostrums so you can actually taste the difference, and you'll see, immediately you'll see the difference. This is like a fine wine versus a table wine, or, maybe alcohol is not the best analogy here. It's like a very high quality, beautiful cheese. It doesn't even taste that cheesy, but it's like a really good cheese or a really good steak versus a really low quality steak. You can taste it immediately. The steak is probably the best metaphor. Yeah. I mean, think about the best steak you've had, some sort of grass-fed Wagyu cross steak, and then just a run-of-the-mill steak that's like, it's meat, but it's not that good. And that's,
it doesn't pass the eye test, right? The smell test. You can just tell.
Or the smell test. No.
You'd be proud of my recent endeavors when I raised some hogs here on my land, some pigs, and I did them completely corn and soy free. They were forested. They ate some acorns. They had supplemental feed that we had to custom blend through a nutritionist because we didn't want them eating junk. But we get our raw milk here. I'm out in the country, so my homie Jessie and the cow that I actually get my milk from, I know the name of, Lula. So she recently calved and was producing so much colostrum, and she doesn't sell that because she doesn't want, ATF or whoever it is barging down her door with assault rifles. But she gave us extra that we could try, but also to feed the pigs to. And the reason I'm saying that is because intentionality is very important to me. Also, it kind of mirrors down the company and all of our individual values into the final product of like the highest intention. But when I eventually slaughtered those pigs and processed the meat, the depth of the color and the taste of the fat, it's a different thing. I'm sure you know this, but 99% of pigs are raised indoors. They never see outside. It's terrible. We know the issues with PUFA and the high linoleic acid content. This is a totally different thing. And it's similar with a steak that you're going to get from Sam's Club versus a steak you're going to get from your local rancher. And it's the same with this colostrum. If you look at them, there are two completely different foods. One is rich and real and alive, and one is just kind of this, questionable white powder that you are taking in the hope that it's going to do something, probably not getting the results you expect because it's not real anymore.
I agree with you completely. And I think that, like we said in the beginning, colostrum is real. There's a lot of supplements that don't work really well for humans, but man, the research on colostrum is pretty darn robust. I would venture to say it's basically as robust or close as creatine. You think creatine is sort of just almost incontrovertible. It's really hard to argue with the benefits of colostrum, which is cool when you think about it, right? How cool is it that an animal food, a special animal food, has so much powerful research? It's been studied in Alzheimer's models, dementia models. It's been studied in athletic models, recovery. It's been studied in leaky gut models, and all sorts of improvements with colostrum. And again, the data is robust. I don't think anyone argues that colostrum is valuable for humans. So just like creatine, you want to get, it's even harder to get a good colostrum than it is a good creatine. There are manufacturers of creatines. Lineage makes a great one that are they're tested and they're 99.9% pure, but it's just one thing. It's a creatine molecule. Colostrum is so much more complicated. It's a biological fluid from a cow that has to be collected at the right time, processed in the right way, not heated too much, cold filtered, and it has to be non-de-fatted. It's such a challenging thing. It's much easier to get good creatine, much harder to get really good quality colostrum, but you'll know the difference. And I think people will feel the difference in a pretty massive way. I mean, it's the next time I come back to Costa Rica, I'm going to have to be a little careful with how much colostrum I can bring back in my checked luggage, because they're going to think I'm going to need a supply, man. I'm going through it pretty fast. 10 grams a day, 20 grams a day. I mean, I'll probably back off. But there's another thing I'll mention about colostrum that we haven't even touched on. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to Switzerland. And I'm going to Switzerland to do inisphoresis again. People may have seen me talk about this. I did a post on X and YouTube video and a post on Instagram about this blood cleaning procedure I did in Mallorca over the summer. I'm going back to Switzerland to do it once more and to retest for toxins. And I'm going with my girlfriend. And it's super exciting to be doing that again. And it's flu season. And some of the most, I think, compelling research with colostrum is that it's 2 to 3 times better than a flu vaccine. This is crazy. And this is not like all vaccine weirdness and craziness, the V word. You might have to bleep it out on YouTube aside. There are randomized controlled studies where people get, I think it's 1 gram of colostrum a day versus a flu vaccine over the course of a winter. And the people who got the colostrum had significantly less flu and much shorter courses when they get it. Wow. So for traveling this winter, I'm not going anywhere without colostrum. I feel like I'm pretty healthy in general, right? I'm getting sun. I'm out in the world. I have good vitamin D levels living in Costa Rica right now. But look, I'm going to be sleep deprived going across the Atlantic to go back to Switzerland. Colostrum is also like a vaccine. It's a passive immunity. That's so cool. I mean, that to me is just incredible. Like you can look up the study. Maybe we can put the study on the screen here during the podcast, and you can literally read the abstract. And it says, I'm just paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me. Colostrum appears to be 3 times more effective than a flu vaccine. What? Talk about a powerful food for travel, especially this time of year, you know?
It's another example of nature being so intelligent that it put the medicine in the food, it put the vaccine in the food. It's really incredible.
So intelligent, yeah.
Yeah, you do have to be maybe a little bit careful with some raw, uncut white powder of gallons of it in your suitcase traveling over international borders. So maybe don't do 20 grams a day, but even at those low doses to get those effects is really remarkable. For somebody
a couple
that's
of grams a day in effect, yeah.
Yeah, for somebody that's pretty dialed, you know, they listen to this podcast, so they're obviously into an animal-based lifestyle. They're doing all of the right things, but maybe they haven't tried colostrum. What are some of like the potential little gaps that they might be missing on by not trying it? You know, they might be doing nose to tail nutrition, they're eating their organs, they're doing bone broths, they're doing the sunlight. Is colostrum, because it's so special, is it actually unique in its effects? And what might somebody expect to experience if they add colostrum in?
Yeah, I mean, you have all these gaps. Like even with, I bet that if you or I checked, we would have elevated levels of zonulin, a protein in the gut that actually triggers leaky gut. Mm-hmm. Zonulin's a little tricky to check. You can check stool zonulin. Blood levels of zonulin are not as specific as we wish they were, but theoretically, if you could look inside your guts, I bet that you and I still have zonulin in there because look, I live in Costa Rica. There are still pesticides used here. Yeah. Not every food that I get is organic. Glyphosate and pesticides. Maybe I didn't even mention that earlier when I talked about all of the assailants for our guts. But you think about like, even if you are doing things perfectly, I think that you are going to still have detectable levels of glyphosate and other pesticides, 2,4-D, atrazine in your blood. And where are they coming from? They're coming from your food. Yeah. So an extra layer of protection for your gut that is clinically proven, unquestionable with colostrum. It's incredibly valuable. And then you think about this PRP, these proline-rich polypeptides, bidirectional immune modulation. Theoretically, someone might experience mood improvements, energy improvements, improved recovery from the gym, increased libido, better sleep, and probably, you know, when you improve the sort of the integrity of your gut, everything else is going to get better.
Yep.
Little inflammatory things might get better. And I think that is sort of the upstream factor that will trickle down into all these downstream effects that make you feel better overall. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to try it. And I think like most of the organs, you will feel it.
Yeah. Do you think there's any concern for people who might say that they are sensitive to dairy, being that it's a dairy product? Do you view this in the same kind of lens of like pasteurized dairy versus raw? And if it's in its whole form, it's probably less objectionable. Have you heard any pushback around that? People being sensitive to casein or lactose or anything?
If someone has an allergic hypersensitivity allergy to dairy, you'd want to go slow, right? If you have an IgE-mediated anaphylactic allergy to dairy, you might want to be careful with colostrum. For those of us that are lactose sensitive, I don't think it's an issue at all. I mean, I am lactose intolerant. If I drink too much raw milk, I will feel it. I have a threshold. But 3 grams of colostrum, or even 10 grams, I mean, this is less than a tablespoon. So from a casein perspective, I think it's unlikely to cause issues unless you are anaphylactic, super allergic hypersensitivity to dairy. And in that case, maybe it's not for you. Maybe dairy's not for you at all. But try it and see. It's interesting. But I think for most of us, the dairy question is lactose, and there's so little lactose in the colostrum at 3 to 10 gram dosing that it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I also wonder sometimes, I get these kind of messages all the time that people attribute introducing raw dairy to fixing their underlying gut issue that they maybe thought was lactose intolerance, that might actually have just been something else. It could have been leaky gut or whatever it was. And that healing and sealing the gut, like you said, is going to have these downstream or upstream effects of basically fixing everything. So it could also potentially be a healing adjunct to that as a kind of form of medicine again.
Unquestionably. There's no panacea, right? Everybody's individual. I've learned that over the years many, many times. We're all unique humans. And so what works for me or you may not work for someone else. But I think for the majority of people, colostrum is going to be a very powerful, positive thing. I'm thinking of one of my friends specifically that's quite sensitive to dairy, and it seems like it triggers his acne. So it'll be interesting. I want him to try it, and I'll see if I can report back. I don't know if it would actually trigger his acne, but I mean, he's tried everything, right? Raw dairy and everything. And so there are people out there for whom, like you said, casein may be immunogenic. And in that case, it may not be the right thing, but I think for most of us, gosh, it's just such a powerful thing that a lot of us, including myself, were leaving on the table because there wasn't a great thing. This is the same story as the whey protein, I kind of laugh at this, but my detractors recently made videos saying, well, Paul Saladino used to say whey protein is BS, and now his company makes a whey protein. And I said, well, thank you for telling the story here, which is
right. Bingo.
There really wasn't a good enough whey protein that was cold processed and had high enough quality, that was grass fed, that was actually free from metals at the levels that I would want for me to take. And so, yeah, previously I absolutely thought whey protein was horrible. And now I take it every single day in my morning smoothie for the glutathione benefits. It's the same thing with colostrum. Like, if there's not something great out there, let's go make it. And then people are going to benefit. But I'm not going to take it until I can really confirm that we're making something really good.
Yeah, that's perfect. I know the exact video you're talking about. And I watched it in the same lens. I was like, this is perfect. You've actually just showed exactly why Paul and Heart and Soil made a better whey, because it was bullshit because of all these artificial ingredients, the fillers, the excipients. And now, voila, we created the best thing on the market. So thank you for helping us. And it was funny, actually, because a lot of the comments also pointed that out too. So thank you.
You know what we should do is we should do a reaction video with that video. I'll talk to the marketing folks over there, and I'll do a reaction video, and we'll use it as a piece of content. We'll be like, yeah, I mean, here's me reacting to this cranky individual who probably just, needs to get more sleep or something.
I'll need some
maybe needs a little colostrum. Yeah, he needs some colostrum in his life. It's like, hey, thanks for telling the story. That's exactly true.
So colostrum aside, when we focus back in on the gut and, nose to tail, animal-based eating as the foundation of this pyramid, what are some maybe surprising or out of the box things that people don't realize could be problematic for the gut, or maybe some lifestyle mediated factors? Because we've talked about ultra processed foods, we've talked about pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, we've talked about seed oils. Do you think stress levels, mold, artificial light, could these also influence gut health? What are some of the things you think about?
100%. I mean, in doing research on colostrum, I came across something that sauning too much could cause your gut to become leaky. And there's a video that we're going to put out soon about how to sauna protocol. But if a sauna is too hot and you're in it too long, you can just maybe move out of the Goldilocks zone and into a place where it's harmful. We know this, right? I mean, the same can be true of cold. There's less evidence for cold exposure than there is for sauna. Sauna appears to be helpful for humans, but intense training, intense heat, all of these things can cause gut issues. I remember when I was in medical school at the University of Arizona, I guess it was 15 years ago or something now. I was running. I used to run a lot. I was a long runner. And runners have it. I mean, if you go for a hard run, you get something called the trots. Yeah. You finish that run and man, you can't eat anything. You can maybe drink water, but you're going to have diarrhea. I'm sorry to be graphic, but like you get the trots, and that's just like overtraining and stress. It shunts blood away from your intestines and you get damage. And so I didn't know it at the time, and I certainly wasn't taking colostrum then, but I was getting a little bit of leaky gut. I was causing transient, thankfully, not chronic or static leaky gut, but there's a lot of things. So all of your friends doing CrossFit, people heat training, people in the sauna too long, you can absolutely cause this. I think there's evidence that even a couple of nights of interrupted sleep can cause it. Yeah. So yes, extra stress. We talked about NSAIDs, antibiotics, proton pump inhibitors, so omeprazole, the purple pill, all these things can cause this. So when you interrupt anything that nature put into you in terms of your digestive apparatus, if you try and mitigate proton pumps in the stomach, you're going to cause leaky gut later on. So antibiotics that we're taking, you're giving your kids antibiotics for their ear infection, or you're taking antibiotics for this or that, or you're causing leaky gut at some level. And so colostrum has an application as an adjunct in all those situations. Look, if you are training for a marathon, or you're training for an Ironman, or you're training for CrossFit or High Rocks, more power to you. I'm impressed, but here's something that you could add to your training that could be an adjunct that could help with all of that huge amount of stress. If you're going, to run through Death Valley, or it's not the summer in most of the world right now, but when it comes, if you're in the summer and you're super hot, you're outside, all this is something to consider.
Yeah. I remember seeing a post from Rob Wolf, and this might have been 7 or 8 years ago, and he was highlighting this. It actually was part of the motivation for him to make a move. I think he was in Nevada at the time, and he was highlighting lipopolysaccharide and the increase in leaky gut from training in heat. And he was into CrossFit and he was into jujitsu, and he was basically just saying that he's had lifelong issues with gluten sensitivity and gut issues, and he basically moved to somewhere colder so he could do more of what he loved in a less extreme way, but not add the added element of heat stress. Because it's like with any of these things, right? Too much of a good thing is too much. It's the dose makes the poison. It's like sauna's awesome until you have to be, Joe Rogan's and David Goggins' baby and have it at like 250 degrees and turn it into a dick swinging competition. And then it's maladaptive instead of hormetic. So dose makes the poison. And if we're going to do that, be sensible and certainly add in the things that really help. So things like colostrum, things like an animal-based diet. You jog my memory. I was recently talking to Josh Bridges, who back in the 2010s through the 2015 era of CrossFit was always a podium kind of contender, a finisher, one of the top dogs. And he was talking about at the time, he had no idea about an animal-based diet. He talks in the podcast about finding your work after he'd retired and how it changed his life. And he was like, it's the one thing he would have changed if he could go back and compete at that level again, because he looked very physically impressive. He was jacked. He was a savage. He was a top 5 finisher regularly. He podiumed a couple of times. But he said he was an absolute mess on the inside, just rotten farts that would anger his wife. He was chronically inflamed. And now he basically says he could never sacrifice his health in that way again to pursue that level of athleticism. But he feels better. He's moving more weight. He's eating more nutrients.
Yeah, he was a savage.
Nutrient-dense
He was a
food.
savage.
Crazy.
Has Rich Froning found benefits to an animal-based diet?
Yes, some, with the knee inflammation and recovery. And that's one of the things that Rich talks about a lot. Similarly, when he was in his heyday and he was in the GOAT of the sport, and it's just kind of earn it and burn it. And these guys are just purely just ramming as many calories in as they can and not giving much attention to the quality of those calories. It comes with a cost. I think what a lot of these guys are learning now and becoming aware of, and it's largely thanks to people like you and this increasing internet exposure to different ideas, that there's no biological free lunch. Like I posted a reel just today, actually, where I said, you can outtrain a bad diet. Pro athletes do it all the time, but you cannot outtrain the consequences of a bad diet. And that's the Josh Bridge example. That's the Rich Froning example. They talk about back in the heyday, nobody was really guiding them on this. They were just eating as many calories as they could put in their face because they were training like maniacs 3-4 times a day. But it came at a cost, and that's joint degradation, or it's, gut issues, or it's thyroid function. And, people hopefully can learn from, those mistakes. As physically impressive as those people became, they now speak about the importance of really paying attention to the food and nose to tail nutrition and caring about where things come from. So I think it's wonderful. But yeah, we never had the awareness of colostrum back then either. And these things seem to, it's funny because it's an ancient food, obviously, but it seemingly came out of nowhere. And now it's like the new trendy thing,
It's important to emphasize you can out-train the calories from a bad diet, but like you said, not the other food additives. You can't out-train refined sugars and starches causing leaky gut. You can't out-train carboxymethylcellulose and carrageenan causing inflammation and leaky gut. You can't out-train linoleic acid getting put into your mitochondria and cell membranes and lipoproteins and causing increased susceptibility to oxidation. You can't out-train these things. You can't out-train heavy metals. You can't out-train forever chemicals, PFAS. You can't out-train microplastics. You can't out-train BPA and BPS. And all of these things are more highly concentrated in ultra-processed foods, unquestionably. So anyone who says you can out-train a bad diet is just completely wrong.
Yeah, agreed. The microplastics things, I want to circle back to the colostrum product too, because you pointed it out earlier. It's in a beautiful amber glass bottle with a paper scoop on it. Yeah. That obviously we care about intentionality from, the entire process. Do you worry about microplastic exposure just in packaging and containers too? It's not necessarily just heating them, putting Tupperwares in the dishwasher, for example. Like this can come, we know through plastic bottles, it's leaching into the water. So could this be the same for a plastic contained supplement, that it's leaching into the actual product too?
Sure. We need to test it more, but absolutely. Yeah. You look at a lot of the other, I'm not familiar with any other colostrum on the market that comes in glass. I think we're the only one. Nothing else is in glass. Everything else is in plastic. And who knows, how long it's sitting in there. It's in glass. And it's shearing off fragments and getting in there. It's hard to say, but I think the worst things in microplastics are the plastic bottles, the things that are hot fluids and liquids in plastics. So you've got like baby bottles that are getting heated in plastic, soup cans. These are horrible. And I think we're only going to understand more and more about how bad this is when you look at nanoplastics. So really, you have to look at things that are less than 1 micrometer in size. That's where you need to be concerned. So nanoplastics are the biggest deal. One of the companies that I'm working with for this industry took a couple people over to Switzerland and did an assay on the nanoplastics in their blood. And the innisphoresis incidentally significantly reduced it, like 75% in one session.
Wow.
But the numbers of nanoplastics was enormous, much higher than we're aware of. If you look at people talking about microplastics in the human blood, they'll say, oh, I had six particles per milliliter in my blood, or some sort of numbers on the order of this. In terms of nanoplastics, at least in this preliminary testing, they were seeing millions of nanoplastics per milliliter of blood. So microplastics are the tip of the iceberg. We really need to redo all of the research on microplastics and look for nanoplastics. And I think what we're going to find is it's just going to blow people away, and it's going to make people be very sad. But I think, look, the biggest things you can do to reduce your microplastics / nanoplastic exposure are never drink out of a plastic bottle, never drink soup out of a can, never put hot liquids or heat anything up in plastic, and never don't drink out of Tetra Pak, don't drink out of cans. And again, this sounds extreme, but it's like, how healthy do you want to be? Because you think like every can that you're looking at has been sitting on a shelf, every can is lined with plastic. One of the worst offenders that people don't know about are the coffee cups that look like they're paper on the outside, but they're plastic lined. This is Starbucks and everywhere else, every airport, your paper coffee cups are lined with plastic, and you're putting scalding liquid in there. And that is just teeming with microplastics. And then plastic tea bags, which are more common than people think, just exploding microplastics into your food because you're putting hot water onto it. So of course, I'm so proud of the fact that everything we do at Heart and Soil is either paper packaging, like the whey protein, or it's glass packaging. That's certainly going to reduce microplastics levels in our products. And they've been tested and they're microplastics free.
Yeah. This is an incredible jumping off point to where I wanted to kind of start closing out the conversation with where we began, which is kind of the energy of the new year and what's trendy, what's in for you, what's out for you. And something that I think is very trendy right now, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. And the reason the microplastic idea jumped me off on this is the unregulated and abundant use of peptides. And there are contaminants in these. We've seen studies where it's not just the peptide that you think you get in. There's excipients, there's all kinds of foreign material. And people are not just ingesting this anymore. Now they're mainlining it in. And every time I open up Instagram now, it seems that somebody's talking about TB500 or BPC 157 or TRT. And I know you talked recently about having a very healthy, about 850, right? At your 48 years of age, 850, that's incredible, all natural. But people are chasing those numbers now, jumping on peptides, jumping on hormone replacement therapy, and often not doing it through a doctor, not doing it through a provider, doing it through these kind of black market places. And who knows what's in that stuff? What's your take on this whole obsession currently with peptides and GLOW and GHKQC or whatever other abbreviations they have?
I get it. I mean, we want to stay young. I feel it more every year. As a 48-year-old, I think about my skin, and I think about my joints, and I think about my testosterone and my fertility and my libido all the time, man. I think about it all the time. And so I get it. I understand why people want to do it. I just don't do it. I took BPC 157 once for 3 days after I nearly broke my neck surfing in Australia. And I just didn't, I don't know. I injected it sub-Q in my, the small amount of adipose tissue in my abdomen, but that was it. That's the only peptide I've ever taken. I didn't really notice anything major. Hopefully it helped, but it was an extreme situation. I don't think I would do it again. I don't think that I see a need for peptides in myself. And I think that this is kind of akin to TRT. I think a lot of us are reaching for peptides too quickly without doing the big rocks first, right? This is majoring in the minor, basically, that we're focusing on all the window dressings. We want all the supplements and all the fancy biohacking gadgets and give me the red light bed and give me the hyperbaric chamber and give me the peptides, but we're not even thinking about our food and how much we're sleeping. And all those things are great. They can make an effort, they can make a difference for people. I mean, hyperbaric is a whole separate conversation that I have some concerns about, but those are just window dressing, right? Those are the drapes. Those are just the throw rugs in your house. You got to get the foundation right first, man. Yeah. It's great to have some nice artwork on the walls of your house, but if your house is not built on a good foundation, then you are in deep trouble. And like, you got to fix the foundation. And the foundation, I think, is food quality and it's sleep. It doesn't go, yeah, that's what you got to do. So show me the person who is doing lots of peptides, whose diet is totally dialed. Man, I can probably count them on one hand, you know, like it's just, it's so rare. That is an anomaly. That is a unicorn if I've ever heard of one. So I think that we're just, and as you said, we are, I think, jumping to these too quickly without fully understanding their long-term ramifications.
Yeah.
So could they be beneficial? Yes. Does everyone need them? No, we're just being lazy and we won't fix the foundation of the house. So, you know, I'll let people know if I change my perspective on that. But like you said, it's pretty clear that they can have pretty negative consequences. And, you know, the other thing that's interesting here from a nature perspective, like we talked about, is that exosomes, so peptides and exosomes, I think exosomes are the next thing. And they're fascinating. But again, they occur in food, right? So raw milk has exosomes. Colostrum contains exosomes. These are membrane-bound organelles that cells use to communicate with each other that contain microRNAs and other signaling molecules. It's in food. We know that peptides are in food. BPC 157 is produced in the secretions of the stomach. It's in the gut, you know, so gut and digestion from heart and soil probably almost certainly has BPC 157 in it. You think there are peptides in the heart, there are peptides in the testicles, and part of this is probably the reason these organs are beneficial. Get them fresh if you can. If you can't, then we've got you covered. So, but yeah, this is maybe, again, this is like we're jumping over the thing that our ancestors have always had. And again, I'm not trying to be some sort of appeal to nature fallacy here. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in this, but again, I take supplements. You know, I take a methylated B vitamin because I have a polymorphism in my MTHFR. I don't get all of my B vitamins from food because I can't, you know, so there are benefits to the technology that we have in the sort of nutritional space. And we must not forget that there are so many powerful things that are actually food and food derived organs, and the colostrum or the whey protein being perfect examples of this. And when you're taking something like a peptide, be very careful with what's in it, because this could be a real problem long-term. And we don't really know what happens when you take, I'm worried more about the GnRH analogs, you know, long-term, or the TB500, or these things. We don't really know what happens long-term with these.
I know.
And I never really, these peptides that have a short-term effect, it doesn't really appeal to me. I don't want to be on something for the rest of my life. I don't want to be on an injection for the rest of my life if I can avoid it. And to think like, oh, I have to cycle on and off. I don't know if I think this is a good thing long-term. We're going to find out. You know, the problem is that in 50 years, we're going to know, right? And there's an interim period where a lot of these things are being marketed without the full data. This is perhaps true of the entire longevity space. In 50 years, we're going to know if a calorie-restricted vegan diet really promotes longevity. Probably in 20 years, we're going to know the answer to that, which I suspect is no. But you know, in the interim, people who are doing those things and making these lavish claims can say whatever they want. This is sort of the danger here. It's like, oh, this is going to help me live a long time. Well, we're going to find out in 50 years, and I fear we're going to look back and think they were dead wrong and nobody held them accountable.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch, man. I've got my animal-based popcorn and I'm just sitting back and I'm like, okay, we'll see how it all comes out in the wash. Maybe the only one left to tell the tale is going to be 150-year-old Brian Johnson, but I don't know. Something tells me that's not going to be the case.
So.
I think, you know, there's a lot of clues in where we came from that are painting a clearer picture for where we should be going when we think about optimal health. And modern problems can require modern solutions, and it's amazing that we have options. But yeah, let's exhaust all of the foundational options first before we go running to these things, because I think you're dead on when it's majoring in the minors. It's really indicative so often of people not wanting to delay that gratification and work hard over the course of months and years to fix something when they've been sold this kind of Amazon Prime mindset that, hey, you can have this in a couple of weeks if you just take this needle. And it's just pretty wild to me how readily people will jump on that without a second thought. So power to them. I hope it's all upside, but there's rarely a biological free lunch, right?
Well, we know that's not true. I mean, you look at Ozempic and these other, GLP related peptides, it's clearly not a biological free lunch, and what's ironic about that market clearly is that, hey, there's a great way to realign, to reset your satiety, and it's just eating whole foods. Eat food for humans. Eat single ingredient foods. Eat foods that pass the great grandmother rule. That's your Ozempic, and it doesn't have any of the major side effects. There's no Ozempic butt. There's no sarcopenia. There's no eye issues. There's no gut issues. It's just, hey, there's no biological free lunch. You'll find out, and there's an easy way to reset your satiety, which is what Ozempic is doing. Ozempic is basically steak and eggs and fruit in an injection, and you're going to find out that it's going to have some bad side effects.
Yeah. And it's so much tastier to eat it than to stick it in your bum, I think. So let's just more about that. That was awesome. And I think you said something that's key. And I think it's why people appreciate you, which is, if I change my mind, I will let you all know. So, with that on the table, as we bring this one into close, is there anything that you are currently wrestling with? Are you changing your mind on anything? Are you out here to make any bullish predictions for 2006 Paul version? What are we getting into? What are we leaving behind? What are we doubling down on? What are we changing our mind about? Does anything come up there?
Well, we've got the guide. So I want to let people know we've got the 2026 Guide to Radical Health coming out. And that's kind of my summary of what I'm thinking about. Yeah. I'll preview it here, but it's like my summary around light and sleep. And so I'm thinking a lot about light and the bulbs, but in terms of my diet, it's basically still animal-based. But I'll say this, and people might find this interesting. I've done a lot of experiments recently. Most of them have failed, Steve. Mm-hmm. So I've just been thinking, I'm getting probably, I feel best personally with around 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. Not everybody needs that much, but I'm surfing in the morning, I'm working out in the afternoon, not a crazy amount, but I'm hitting the punching bag and doing some lightweight lifting. And so I feel better with more carbohydrates. Let me experiment with complex carbohydrates. Let me try oatmeal. And this is, ironic because I've said oatmeal is bullshit, right? Well, I was like, if I'm going to eat oatmeal, I'm going to ferment it. So I was getting fermented oats, and it seemed like it was good for a while. And then I really got like swelling in my mouth. I got like a sore on the edge of my tongue, like a fever blister. And then I had swollen gums and really sensitive teeth that resolved when I got rid of the oatmeal. So and if anyone knows me, they know my diet is just regimented. So I changed nothing except including oats, which I'm fermenting overnight, which nobody is doing. So I'm fermenting my oats, trying to detoxify them as much as possible. Some sort of, nod to where we've come from as humans. Doesn't work. Okay, well, let me try sourdough. All right, wheat. Wow, it's gluten. I don't know. Seems okay. Same thing sort of happens. I get mouth stuff. I get swollen gums. I don't feel as good. So I failed sourdough. I don't feel good with, I don't feel good with oats. I tried white rice. Didn't feel good. Proper fine starch, not a great thing. But I have started eating some tubers. I'm kind of on the fence about white potatoes as a nightshade. I know I react to other nightshades, but I'm curious and I'm thinking about every piece of this with oxalates, with all these things. Maybe some sweet potatoes. Generally, sweet potatoes are pretty high in oxalates. There's a couple here in Costa Rica that are like taro and malanga, kind of these like tropical sweet potatoes that are a little bit lower in the oxalates. And I prepare them with a boil, and I'm trying to mitigate that as much as possible. But that's sort of the newest addition to my diet. And I feel pretty good with that for now. Again, that's breaking news. I'll do boiled sweet potatoes, malanga or taro with some grass-fed butter. I'll put in a raw egg yolk and some salt. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I use for carbohydrates along grass-fed beef. We're going to do what I eat in a day in 2026 video, but it's still like, I'm still getting a lot of my calories from meat. Grass-fed farm here in Costa Rica that I found is really good. They do a Wagyu cross. And I'm doing a lot of raw milk. I'm doing, obviously a zero heavy metal sea salt that we tested with ABNRF. People can find that, and we'll put in the show notes or something, the details of that testing around heavy metals and sea salts. I'm doing egg yolks and duck eggs and turkey eggs. And I found even goose eggs here at the farmer's market. I'm doing some fruit, some cantaloupe and stuff, and I'm doing honey in the raw milk, and I'm doing some berries like blueberries here. And then I'm doing organs. I'm still doing fresh testicle and that desiccated testicle from the whole package from Heart and Soil. And then I'm doing the meat, and I'm doing maybe a little more than a pound a day of the meat, plus protein from the whey protein from Heart and Soil in the morning in my smoothie, and then probably protein in the milk. So it's pretty similar. And it's, technically it's pretty close to animal-based, animal-based 30 is going on right now. The only thing that I'm tweaking is adding a little bit of starch and experimenting with that. I've always been excited to be sort of transparent and to let people know what I'm thinking about. And it's interesting. I don't think everyone has as sensitive an immune system as I do, but man, the animal-based diet just really works well for me and for a lot of people because it's so simple: meat and fruit and some raw dairy if you tolerate it. The goal is always to add more things to your diet, right? And experiment, but as a baseline, that works really well. And that's still, after 5+ years, is what works the best for me. It's nice to think like, okay, I can eat some tubers every once in a while. And, I started, much to the glee of my girlfriend, throwing in a little asparagus every once in a while at dinner. And she's so proud of me. These things don't seem to bother me in small amounts, but obviously I'm not getting there's no real performance benefit to asparagus. It's just like maybe mix it up a little bit, have a raw carrot every once in a while if I feel like crazy. So I'm trying to diversify my diet, and that's always been the goal. How can I eat the fewest number of plant toxins with the largest amount of nutrients from animal foods without triggering my immune system? My journey's led me through carnivore to animal-based, and then trying to add things around the edge in the lens of bioindividuality. Again, we'll put a much more detailed summary in the Guide to Radical Health in 2026, which people can check out.
That's awesome, man. I love watching you experiment because you've got a very cool mind and just an amazing way of delivering your thought process around the whys and the why nots. And I think it's very refreshing coming from the carnivore MD to Paul Saladino MD to the continued evolution. And every time we check in, there's something new to chew on, and it's so fun. And I'm grateful we get to talk and bring the listener in on the journey, because that's really what we're encouraging for them too. Run the experiment. Don't just listen to us say what it is. Like go do it, go apply it. Go build your version of the animal-based diet and, veer out into the weeds to find what helps you thrive. But it's going to be built on that very simple and very empowering framework. And I love that, because simple scales and fancy fails. So let's keep it simple. Keep it real.
Agreed.
All right, man. Last call to action. Anything you want to leave the listener with as, we're getting to that January hump. We're about a couple of weeks away from where 80% of New Year's resolutions have failed. And by February, everybody's back to doing their whole thing. And maybe I'll try again in 2027. Any parting words of wisdom for really reclaiming one's birthright to radical health?
I think we should make like February resolutions,
Yeah.
There's like,
learn from the mistakes that we set in January.
It's February resolutions are it's all about the things that you said you were going to do for New Year's that you stopped doing, that you should re-engage with. It's like people, they get re-engaged, they get remarried 20 years later, which is, really sweet in a relationship that works. Well, here's your February or March resolution. I think we're going to start that. Like, let's remind ourselves that we have these intentional resolutions for New Year's, and we may or may not have done that well with them. Let's re-engage. So let's restart those in February and March. And if it goes badly, we can restart in April or June and be just fine, Yeah,
it's never too late to start again. And the beautiful thing is, we're launching AB 30 every month now. So
every Animal-Based 30 happens every month for people now.
So let's go. Get on over to the website. Check it out, animalbased30.com.
Get an Animal-Based 30. And if you don't make it in January, get back in February with your February resolutions.
Boom. Beautiful. Thank you, Paul. I'll see you soon, my friend. Stay radical. Keep running the experiments. Keep sharing.
Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
Peace out.
Bye.
See you next time, friends. Bye-bye. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.